Today with us in studio is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, Eric Fingerhut. How are you?
I'm good, Zvika. Thanks for having me.
So, we meet, I would say every time, we have interviews with Jewish organizations in general, like, difficult times, but really, I think, we are in difficult times. And, I think the most pressing thing that, I'm curious about and you have a lot to say is really the murder of two staffers of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. last week. And, right before the weekend, you live in D.C.,
I
right?
do.
You were a member of
Yep.
Congress. Um, so, where were you when this happened?
Well, actually, I was on a train to New York that
Okay.
night um, because I had some meetings there the next day, and I learned the news when I arrived, and I immediately turned around and went back to Washington
Wow.
to try to provide some support and help. And thank God we were able to help in some ways, but it's just so. Zvika, this was such a horrific uh, event. It's it's torn us apart, and still, of course, we're still mourning. I believe we're recording on Monday that I believe the Levaya, the funeral for Sarah Milgram of blessed memory, is tomorrow
Hmm.
in Kansas City,
Right.
and we know her family. She herself went to the University of Kansas. She was active at Hillel, and I had the privilege of being the head of Hillel,
Right.
and she interned, I understand, at the Federation in Kansas City. the
So an integral part of,
Yeah,
of, of like a Jewish
right. It's a
community.
close knit Jewish
Right.
community. They I don't know if you remember this, many years ago they had this shooting at the
Yeah,
JCC in
of
Kansas City.
course, yeah.
So,
I'm
and
the
and
former
and
Jewish
and,
World
and
correspondent.
right, and that was actually part of Sarah's story too,
Right.
that she had been growing up when that happened, and so it's a very close
And
knit.
interestingly, I think also then those who were killed, if I recall correctly, were not even
We're
Jewish,
not
but they were at
Jewish.
the
That's
JCC.
correct. That's
Right.
correct. So the fact that her life, unfortunately, was framed by,
Yeah.
in some respects, but she didn't let it. I didn't know her personally, but she clearly didn't let it stop her. She was a ardent Zionist. Came to work at the embassy
Yeah.
and helped support the state of Israel and build.
A lot of these young American Jews that worked or work at the embassies, they're like they're one
Right,
of the good, they're one of
right,
the core
right.
of their.
So, and of course for Yaron, and we have a picture of Yaron at our General Assembly just last year, and
Really?
and again, I didn't
Doing
know,
like speaking?
attending and
Attending.
or helping support. Maybe he
I
might have
guess
been.
well, it was in
He
DC
might have been
and
there helping the
okay.
the ambassador. I'm not
Okay.
sure what his exact role was,
Right.
but staffing. But these were people who were so part of our communities, and of course, the embassy was devastated, as is understandable, and we all are. This is classic. This is when one member of our community is struck down like this. It's how we feel about every one of the chayalim in Israel,
Yeah.
all the hostages, and it's how I know you feel about Sarah and Yaron and our community. So it's just devastating. But of course, Zvika, what really we have to turn our attention to, we in the organized Jewish community, is the security situation and the threat levels. And I think because we've spoken about it before, but really, first of all, you can go all the way back to 9/11 when we first understood that the people who
Radical
attacked
Islam.
who attacked the Twin Towers, would have just as easily attacked Jewish institutions.
Right.
That's
I,
really
I remember I was like 18 and I was like, the world will finally
right,
understand
right,
us.
right.
Well, guess
Well,
what?
and that's
They
actually
didn't.
when my predecessors, including Steve Hoffman,
Yeah.
who's now the head of the Mandel Foundation, then was in my chair,
Hmm.
and also longtime leader of the Cleveland community, started the Secure Community Network to help
Hmm.
advise communities on and build security programs. But I would say that the biggest date that is the turning point is the Tree of Life
Yeah.
shootings, which
In
of course
Pittsburgh.
was October 27th, 2018.
Hmm.
So we're now 7 years,
Hmm.
6.5 years
Right.
later.
And people didn't
And,
realize, Israelis didn't realize,
and
that that there were never shootings in
Right,
Jewish
right,
in
right.
synagogues before.
For us, this look, I grew up.
But Israelis are used to it happening here theoretically.
Of
Like,
course.
they didn't realize it wasn't a thing.
And I think even, like Jews of Europe, already had security
Right.
programs. Every
Yeah.
synagogue had security. It's hard to remember that really as recently as 6.5 years ago,
Metal detectors.
maybe there was a security guard, maybe on
Maybe.
Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, maybe when there was a big event, maybe, but it really wasn't, that every synagogue, every day, all the time. And of course, day schools, again, they had some security camps, but it wasn't at the, so what the Tree of Life shooting demonstrated to us not only was that these threats existed, but also it could happen anywhere because Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh, the neighborhood of Pittsburgh, was the most friendly,
suburban.
Yeah, it's in the city. It was diverse. It was community minded and
not Manhattan,
right? That it could have,
not
right,
Los Angeles.
Right. And then, of course, you had Poway, California, which nobody even heard of outside of San Diego. Somebody shot at Chabad. And then Colleyville, Texas. Nobody ever who knew where Colleyville, Texas was. Right. So the lesson that this could happen anywhere. And so in 2018, and this was about when I had the privilege of being asked to lead the Jewish Federation system, that we knew maybe we had a dozen, maybe depending how you count, communities that had some kind of community-wide security plan. But
out of
140, north.
So that's nothing.
So we set to work, and with amazing philanthropic support, donors nationally, but also each community then took it upon themselves to build a full-time professional security program. It's housed at the Federation. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year now on security, and that doesn't even count. I mean, we could only estimate how much every day school and every camp and every synagogue is also spending on top. And then, of course, we have our partners at the Secure Community Network that help develop these programs and train people. And then we have the Community Security Service that helps train volunteers outside of synagogue. And in each community, the professional security director, who's a part of the Federation team, now is also in touch with local law enforcement. And I'll tell you, Zvika, every time I visit a community, and I'm on the road pretty much all the time. Everywhere I go, one of the first people I see always now is the community security director, right? That I know those people.
So they all have them now? Like it's
130 out of 140 federations now have them.
Okay, and some of the federations are small.
Right,
so.
but we'll finish. Some have multiple, like there's a security team that serves 3 or 4 small. But it covers about 90% of the Jewish community. It'll be 100% by the end of the year. That's our goal.
Okay.
We have a program we call Live Secure, which was offering matching grants and training and support and all of that.
Right. So do you get federal funding?
So let's talk about that. So can we put a pin in? I want to come back to that question. But I do want to say that it's been incredible growth of this security apparatus of the Jewish community, and really when you hit the next big date, which is October 7th, which started really a new level of incitement. People, of course, are familiar with the college campuses. I'm sure you cover it much, and I'm sure it's been discussed on this podcast. But it wasn't just college campuses. It was city council meetings and school board meetings and marches in the downtown centers and in workplace.
Yeah, everywhere.
And there was incitement, genocide and hate at amazing levels. And so this is, what happened in Washington last week is the inevitable result of that incitement, right? Whether this person is a lone wolf or part of a plot, we'll know eventually. But even a lone wolf is incited by, if everyone's telling you all the time, these are Jews are the killers.
And the fear is also now of copycat.
And so, look, I have to say honestly that the fact that from October 7th till last week, we actually had stopped. There had been many plots that had been uncovered and had been stopped. And then tragically, this one was not. And so it takes us to yet another level, right? Where, okay, we had all these other security pieces in place, but what didn't, what wasn't in place, what needs to be, what needs to now be in place for the future.
And was that, and we'll get to the federal funding, but was that building secured? I mean, was it?
So there was security guards. I can't really at this point say everything about the details because, first of all, they're still all being, uncovered and investigated. we should come back and talk. We need to be very transparent about it, but I don't want to be transparent
And also,
until
it's a Jewish museum,
right.
So actually, the museums usually have security.
Well, but let's say here's what we do know, and what is
Okay.
what is public, which is it is the Jewish Museum. It was an institution that had received, that was targeted. In fact, they had just received a special grant from the city government a couple of days before.
Wow.
Because of security. We've held events there, and so we had, in fact, the Ambassador Herzog, when he was still the ambassador, came and spoke to our one event we had there. So we've always known we need security there, and of course this was a Jewish communal event, and so that was another level of security. And it's an agency of the D.C. Federation, so it also comes under the umbrella of our security programs. So all of these things. Now let's talk about government, I think this is a very important thing. So first of all, we have had governmental support since, I'm sure before Treaty of Light, but especially since, in several ways. One is, of course, there is a grant program which the Federation system helped initiate maybe a decade ago. That in 2018, I don't remember the exact number, but it was maybe $10 million a year for some small grants around the country.
Oh, wow.
Now with advocacy,
federal,
now with our advocacy and with the rise of anti-Semitism and the threat level, it's at $500 million a year.
Wow.
And what these grants do is they provide funding for like the cameras and the hardening of doors and of the property and such like that. Mostly not for personnel, though some a little bit.
Okay.
I'm going to come back to that. And then some states, maybe a dozen states, have added funding, and some local communities have as well. Now, this is all part of our public affairs advocacy.
Right. This is before the fundraising.
Right. This is all part. This is in addition to.
Right.
And look, I've always been really clear. We have a responsibility to protect our community, but the first and most important responsibility to protect the citizens of the country, especially in their places of worship and their places of gathering, is the government. And also, when we hired the professionals, the community security professionals that I discussed just before, in every community, they're working, one of their primary jobs is to work with the local police department and all the law enforcement in the area. Because, look, let's face it, not every law enforcement agency knows the difference between an Orthodox synagogue and Orthodox. They don't know when, they don't know 2 days of Shavuos or 1 day of Shavuos.
Or what's considered anti-Semitic.
Or when the events are going to be. And how. But so we help them do their jobs better. So we've had good partnerships with government. But I have to say that so clearly that government also, if we have to go to another level, in our community, the government has to go to another level too. The fact is that this is domestic terrorism at the highest level. It's directed at the Jewish community, but it affects the entire country, and the only people who can really tackle the problem of domestic terrorism is the government. And you're talking about the FBI and Homeland Security. Look, we have $1 trillion defense budget now in America for foreign threats and terrorism around the world.
Right.
And we really only the federal government can really tackle this problem. And you have to say, almost every time this happens, there's some kind of footprint that you uncover after the fact, right? Oh, we could have found him on the internet, or we could have found him here, we could have found him there. And that's the question: does the FBI have enough analysts? Do they have enough budget? Do they have enough resources to do this?
Freedom of speech. Also, where's the red line?
Local law enforcement needs help from the federal government because they have to patrol the buildings more. They have to be out front of the buildings. There's a lot that needs to be done. And I'm just, we're going to be very aggressive in saying this, not a criticism of the past, but just like after 9/11 or after, when the Department of Homeland Security didn't exist before 9/11.
Right.
You used to walk into an airport and you walked right. I remember you walked right into the plane.
Yeah.
And so
with a bottle.
Right. With the bottle. So we changed the way we live after 9/11 in this country, and we need that level of change. And the one last thing I'll say, and then we can go on to wherever you want, is that a huge part of this incitement, of course, is on social media. And this is a really a terrible problem. And of course, we understand and we respect free speech, and we always have respected free speech. But social media is a different kind of animal, and it's being infected from global. This is the global intifada is coming in through, and so even if we are cracking down on campus, and even if we enforce all the trespassing laws and the hate crime laws and all of that in our cities,
people are still sitting there on their phones and laptops.
They still have the social media, and they're being radicalized there. We were the only Jewish organization that lobbied for and supported the TikTok bill.
I was just going to ask you about
the
that,
investment bill.
and it seemed like it was gonna
Right, and it passed bipartisan
right.
overwhelmingly. And when people asked us why, they said, "Why would you, Jewish Federation of North America? Why do you lobby for about TikTok? And aren't you afraid your kids are going to be angry at you or whatever?"
Is this after October 7th or before?
Oh, it was after October 7th.
After, okay.
And I said exactly that. I said, look, people expect us to, and we have to care about anti-Semitism. And if you care about anti-Semitism, you've got to deal with social media. Now, I didn't think that was the whole answer to the problem. And obviously it hasn't been implemented, so that's a whole nother conversation. But there has to be action about the incitement on social media. It is poisoning. It's poisoning.
You think it actually has a chance? I mean, now it's just not.
Yes, I think the TikTok piece has a chance, but I think even more. I think there's a broader regulatory question that has to be addressed. Look, I'm not old enough to remember, but I love to read American history, and there was a time when in the 30s when Father Coughlin and Charles Lindbergh were spewing hate and anti-Semitism on the radio, and radio was this brand new thing, and all of a sudden everybody had it in their houses, and Charles Lindbergh filled Madison Square Garden with anti-Semitism and pro-fascist rhetoric. And the government did regulate the common carriers, and we're going to have to take this kind of action, and it's hard because they have a lot of influence, the social media companies, and they lobby and they have money and all that, but this is absolutely a huge component of the incitement, and I'm proud we did what we did, but even then I knew it wasn't enough.
Right. So it's interesting in the news, it was all the reports were about two staffers in the Israeli embassy, right? But at the end of the day, if I understand correctly, this is an event by the AJC, right, Jewish organization. So essentially, they were not going after Israelis. Right. They so happened to be Israelis. He was looking to kill Jews.
Again, we're still speaking less than a week.
Right. We don't have all the information.
But at this point, there's no evidence.
There's no evidence he was looking for an Israeli.
There was no evidence that they were going after the Israeli embassy.
Right.
Or, as you say, particularly Israelis. But it's clear that he flew from Chicago to target a Jewish event at a Jewish Jewish building.
Yeah.
And Zvika, events like this happen every night in every community in America.
Yeah.
It could be
multiple events.
Right. It could be anywhere. It could be anywhere. So that's why I say, look, we obviously.
I wonder why he came in from Chicago.
We obviously
wanted to be more prominent.
I think we're still going to learn,
Yeah.
more. But again, there's no question in our mind. This is a new level of incitement. This is not about just Washington, D.C. This is not just about the Israeli embassy. This is about every Jewish community in North America, and what we have to do and what the government has to do. Again, thank God we have a lot of it in place. I mean, we're not starting from scratch. And again, the fact that I can't sit here and read you the private notes, but there've been foiled incidents like this since October 7th for sure. But
how
tragically,
how big? I mean, you probably can't give me the details, but like how big, how dramatic were these threats?
Oh, there've been serious threats. There've been serious threats,
or attacks being foiled.
And again, I think part of it is government action, law enforcement. As I said, they're not
shooting. Is it bombs? What is it?
Well, there have been certainly plans to attack, Jewish institutions, no question.
Okay.
And and again, either they're uncovered in advance by the government, or local officers, or we, a Jewish community security program is aware of some threat and they report it, and then it leads to investigation.
But how many of these types of attacks would you estimate?
Since October 7th?
Would you estimate that were,
I'm sure there've been, in the 10s, 20s,
Okay.
I mean, there's, say a couple dozen, but I mean, I'm sure I don't know them all. But,
right, 100%. Those that you know
those
of.
That I know
yeah,
of. Right,
okay.
Right,
wow,
right.
okay. So now universities and college campuses have been a major focus, not only for the Jewish community. I mean, it's been dominating American news for since October 7th, and it's interesting how before October 7th, we were all speaking about college campuses, but like it went to a whole different level. And there's so many developments in that sphere. So on the one hand, many universities are now suddenly stepping up, right? There's those that before this administration did so, but there are those that are only doing it now because of certain threats.
Right. Look, first of all, what happened right after October 7th, I think, was this. First of all, we don't know the whole story yet of how it was instigated and supported by foreign powers, by foreign money, but also obviously they had willing participants on campus, right? They had faculty, they had student groups, SJP
Including
and others.
some people on campus who knew that this was about to happen or something was about to happen.
Yeah, I mean I've heard those stories,
evidence,
but the point is they were there, and I mean there were the anti-Israel
Right.
activists on campus, and
Even
but they're all being supported by external forces. So you had this conflagration, and it exploded. And the spring of 2024 was really when the campuses were unprepared for it, the presidents were unprepared for it, and they did not take the right kind of action. Over as the spring semester ended in 24 and over the summer, all the Jewish communal organizations were very clear. By the way, we all wrote letters together to every university, and the summary of the letter was enforce your policies, right? They all have policies about time, place, and manner when you can protest, and about harassment, and about disturbances and encampments. They all had policies. Mm-hmm. Enforce your policies, number one, and also to law enforcement. When people break the law, you've got to prosecute. That's the whole point. Otherwise people think they'll continue. So And so by the time we came back to campus by the fall of 24, most universities, had really gotten control of the situation. Now, of course, you see it flaring up again, but it's on a much more limited number, and it's the worst offenders.
Right.
Okay, so now let's talk about the government side of it. By the way, it still baffles me that a place like Columbia, though the most recent example with the most recent interim president, they seem to have done the right thing, showing that you could do this. Really, you could call in the police, you could arrest them, right? I mean, part of what happened that last time is all the other claims that you couldn't do this, you couldn't
suddenly became
obviously
allowed.
Fell apart. But now let's talk about the government. So look, ultimately, these are, especially Harvard, Columbia, which are the two best known, of this. These are private institutions,
and many Jews
with many Jewish students, right? Of course, and faculty and all that. What I say, these are private universities, but, and this is what, of course, the President Trump and his Department of Education, his Department of Justice, are raising the flag, is they all receive substantial public funding, substantial, for research, for student loans, for all sorts of things. Look, when I saw the number, I know that these are big numbers. When I saw the number, $9 billion was the total Harvard federal grant, I was like, that's a lot of money, right? And by the way, well over half of that goes to administrative overhead.
Wow.
It's not even
so. It's basic.
So yes, there's. I'm sure there's some valuable research, But by the way, there's lots of universities in the country that can do, valuable research.
Right.
And
you actually come from this world, also in Cleveland.
Right. I was the chancellor
of Ohio.
Right, the university system in Ohio. So I know this world very well. And there's plenty of universities who have great research institutions and that are not allowing anti-Semitic attacks to happen on campus. So you have the effort on funding. By the way, that it's always been the case. It's been the case that you have the civil rights laws, and students can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights at the United States Department of Education, complaining that their rights have been violated. And we've been encouraging them to do that now for, ever since, even before October 7th. And we were pushing the department to be more aggressive in enforcing this law. Now, if the law let's imagine a case went through the Department of Education and reached its full conclusion, and the conclusion was that, in fact, the university had been discriminating against Jewish students. What is the penalty? The penalty is funding being withdrawn. That's the penalty in the
Right.
law. So really what you've got with the Trump administration is
implementing
is
the
they're
law.
being very, very aggressive, very aggressive, saying we're going to go, we're jumping
But
to the...
that's the way they do
right
it.
to the
They
conclusion.
start
By the way, with
extreme
all
and
due
then they end
respect,
up in the middle.
they're being... I thought the Biden administration was not aggressive enough on
Okay.
this, and we told them that privately, and publicly too on occasion. So that's what you've got. Look, the United States is a country of laws, and everything that the administration is doing is being challenged in court, and ultimately the courts will determine what is a permissible use of the law and what isn't. But the reality that there's been systemic anti-Semitism at Columbia and at Harvard, and I'm sure at many other universities, but haven't gotten the same attention, is indisputable now. I mean, that's the thing that I don't want people to lose sight of who are listening to this, right?
It's
is
back.
You can say we don't think they should be stopping the funding for this research project. You can say that I don't think they should be using visas for as the tool of enforcement. You can say whatever, and those are all legitimate cases to make. But the argument that these places have not engaged in systemic anti-Semitism that has damaged Jewish students and that they didn't protect the Jewish students, that is proven now beyond any doubt.
And now many parents, it's interesting, either like they'll apologize and say, yeah, my son's going to Harvard, or there are the parents that say, I'm afraid for my daughter to go to Harvard, right? And a lot of people are going to other institutions.
Look, I understand why. I mean, my amazing chair of our board, Julie Platt, who's on the board of Penn, and they've had these challenges, and she's worked with them to fix them.
So she made the approach
she always
of not
she'd walk
leaving.
away, right?
She wanted to change from within.
She says, I don't know if she attributes it to her mother or her father. She says, we were always taught that if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu.
Okay.
And so the argument that we should stay engaged in these institutions is very strong. And by the way, Zvika, you know this because you're in journalism. It may be a small number of schools and with not even the most largest student bodies,
right?
But when you look at their influence in society, in journalism, in government, in academia, it's disproportionately. So the argument that you have to stay engaged and fix it instead of walking away is a very strong argument.
Right. So we have to sum up in a second. How are you looking forward towards the next few months in this combat? And
so look, first of all, we're still devastated, and we're going to be, and really just like Tree of Life changed the way we think, this will change again. The deaths of Sarah and Yaron of blessed memory, and we will not let those deaths be in vain, for sure. So we'll continue on the path we were on of strengthening the Jewish security system that is in place, and I'm sure spend even more money on security and on security guards and personnel and intelligence gathering. But then we're also going to make clear, the Jewish Federation System, we are the sort of the government relations advocates for, for the Jewish community and for each of our communities. And we are going to press the case that we need our government to be at a much higher level of resource and focus.
And unfortunately, we don't have enough time.
Terrorism.
But one thing I think you guys have highlighted, and I really enjoy and I follow very closely, is the issue of the surge. What you call the surge is which is really the engagement of engagement of Jews in Jewish life.
100%.
And unfortunately, it had to come out of a negative and dramatic incident, but there are lots of positive things to look at and look forward to.
And you probably know that the original study showed huge surge, and then some people argued that it dissipated, so we went back out and we studied it again.
Yeah.
And it's clear that the surge still is very strong.
Because nothing's over yet.
It's
Also,
diminished
we're
a little
still,
from the original, but the original numbers. But no, it's very strong. We have an opportunity to engage people in Jewish life.
It's a
And look,
historic opportunity.
There's no question. Look, when I've been talking about security defenses, if you will, I mean, the best defense is Jewish life and Jewish identity and Jewish education, and we're going to do that. It's just not an either or. What I get crazy about a little bit is when people say we should be focusing on
Jewish life is,
and you can't you can't have
life,
Jewish people aren't going to participate in Jewish life if they don't feel safe. Once they feel safe, then we can then all the rest follows.
If they're not living, then they can't. They're not
going to drop their kids off at a day school. They're not going to drop their kids off at synagogue.
100%.
If they or walk down the street even.
Yeah. So Eric Fingerhut, thank you so much. And hopefully next time we meet, we'll speak about positive and better things.
Amen.